Medieval England didn't rise on the shoulders of warriors. It rose on the backs of miners who worked in the mist, scraping tin from the earth grain by grain. Tonight, you'll follow their footsteps and discover the hidden trade that shaped Europe while almost no one noticed. If you close your eyes for a moment and imagine the southwestern edge of England, you might picture a quiet peninsula of windswept cliffs, gray seas, and long stretches of rocky coastline. But if you were standing there in the Middle Ages, perhaps, sometime between the 12th and 14th centuries, you would have found a surprisingly busy landscape. You would have watched carts moving slowly along muddy tracks, miners emerging from narrow pits, and merchants talking in a dozen different accents. And at the center of all this activity was something small, dull, and strangely powerful. Tin. Tin did not sparkle like silver, nor did it gleam like gold. It was an unassuming metal, pale and soft, often covered in dirt when freshly pried from the ground. But if you were living in medieval Europe, tin was essential. Without it, you could not make bronze, and without bronze, the tools, vessels, and trade goods that shaped daily life would have simply disappeared. Tin was the quiet metal that kept the medieval world running. And Cornwall, remote, windy, and almost forgotten at the far edge of England, was its greatest source. The story of Cornwall's tin trade stretches much farther back than the Middle Ages. Some believe that ancient Phoenicians once visited the Cornish coast, seeking metals from a land they called the Tin Islands. Whether or not that legend is true, by the medieval era, Cornwall's reputation as the tin heartland of Europe was unquestioned. Tin was the lifeblood of this region, shaping its economy, its people, and even its laws. If you arrived in Cornwall during the early Middle Ages, the first thing you would notice was the sound. Instead of birds or waves, you would hear hammers striking stone, wooden water wheels groaning, and miners calling out as they worked. The mines were not deep tunnels like the ones we imagine today. Most were open works, large pits carved into hillsides where men used picks, shovels, and wooden wedges to pull cassiterite ore from the earth. It was slow, repetitive work. Every strike of the pick was a little moment of hope, a small search for the dark, heavy stones that held the promise of tin. For many Cornish families, mining was not a choice. It was a way of life. Fathers taught their sons how to spot the heavy glint of ore in the soil, how to build wooden troughs to wash stones, and how to recognize the telltale weight of cassiterite. In the evenings, whole families would gather around piles of ore, breaking the stones into smaller pieces. It was dusty work. Tin ore created a fine gray powder that settled into clothing, hair, and even food. Children grew up with the quiet taste of metal in the air. Beyond the mines, the landscape carried signs of constant activity. Streams were redirected to power water wheels. Woodlands were harvested carefully to supply charcoal for smelting. Fields were shared with spoil heaps, piles of discarded stone that never seemed to stop growing. For a visitor, the world of medieval Cornwall might appear bleak and monotonous. But for those who lived there, it was a steady rhythm of survival, work, and modest prosperity. Once the ore was collected, the next stage began, smelting. This part of the process required skill, patience, and an almost instinctive sense for heat. The ore needed to be roasted, crushed, and then heated to extremely high temperatures. Bloomery furnaces dotted the countryside, small, chimney-like structures, built from clay and stone. A smelter might spend a full day tending a single batch of ore, carefully adjusting the airflow using leather bellows. It was not dramatic, fiery labor like modern steelmaking. Instead, it was slow, quiet, and deliberate, something like persuading the metal to reveal itself rather than forcing it out. When the tin finally emerged, it appeared as a bright, silvery liquid flowing from the furnace. The smelter guided it into simple rectangular molds, letting it cool into solid ingots. These were known as white tin, and they were the real treasure of Cornwall. They were small, stackable, and valuable enough to change a family's fortunes. But the story of Cornish tin did not end at the furnace. In fact, that was only the beginning. The trade routes that carried tin across medieval England formed long, winding chains of people, carts, pack animals, and ships. On narrow lanes leading away from mining areas, you would find teams of donkeys carrying panniers filled with ingots. Villagers would step aside to let merchants pass. The faint metallic sound of tin pieces shifting inside wooden crates. A key part of this system was the stannery towns, special administrative centers where tin was weighed, taxed, and stamped with official marks. These towns like Lostwithiel, Truro, and Helston were surprisingly busy places. Inside stannery courts, disputes were handled by a unique legal system run by tinners themselves. Miners had their own version of parliament, their own judges, and their own laws. It was one of the rare areas of medieval England where working-class men had unusual autonomy. If you were standing inside a stannery town, you might witness merchants from as far away as France or the Low Countries. They came to inspect the quality of the tin, negotiate prices, and arrange shipments. Tin was too valuable to simply toss onto any ship. It needed careful accounting, proper storage, and trustworthy handlers. Some merchants even hired armed escorts to guard their cargo on the road to coastal ports. Once the tin reached the coast, the real journey began. Medieval ships, often small and creaking, would be loaded piece by piece with tin ingots. The cargo was heavy but compact. These ships sailed to ports like Rouen, Bruges, and Ghent, cities that depended on tin for bronze making, pewter production, and countless crafts. Pewter plates, bronze cauldrons, church chalices, candlesticks, hinges, Cornish tin ended up in all of them. Every European household that owned pewterware, whether humble or wealthy, was likely using metal that came from the mines of Cornwall. What made Cornish tin so desired was not luxury, it was reliability. It was predictable, consistent, and available in large quantities. In a medieval world where supply chains were fragile and unpredictable, Cornwall's steady output became a foundation of European trade. Markets depended on it. Craftsmen relied on it. Entire industries grew around it. Tin even shaped the social fabric of Cornwall. The tin industry attracted laborers, merchants, officials, clergy, and entire families seeking opportunity. Some settlements grew into bustling towns. Others remained small villages clustered beside streams, their houses coated with the gray dust of tin processing. Life was hard, but was stable. Tin provided livelihoods during times when agriculture alone could not support the population. The crown noticed this prosperity. Kings and queens taxed tin heavily, using it to fund wars, castles, and political ambitions. Some monarchs even intervened directly in tin affairs, granting charters, creating stannery privileges, and regulating trade to maintain revenue. Every block of tin carried a small story of labor, law, and power. Even the environment of Cornwall was shaped by tin. Hills were carved open. Rivers were shifted. Forests were harvested in cycles to supply charcoal. The landscape you see today, scarred yet beautiful, still carries the quiet marks of medieval mining. But perhaps the most overlooked part of this story is the people behind it. The miners who rose before dawn, the smelters who monitored the unpredictable dance of heat, the women who sorted ore, the merchants who hauled goods along steep roads, the sailors who navigated rough waters with heavy cargo, all of them played a role in building medieval England's economy. And they did it not with grand inventions or dramatic breakthroughs, but with small, repetitive actions repeated thousands of times. In the long, slow rhythm of medieval life, tin became a bridge connecting Cornwall to the wider world. It linked remote villages to bustling markets, brought foreign coins into local pockets, and helped build the very objects people use daily. Tin candlesticks lit medieval homes. Tin alloy church vessels held sacred rituals. Tin bronze formed tools that supported industries from cloth making to farming. The story of Cornwall's tin trade is not one of sudden change or dramatic events. It is a story of endurance, of how a simple metal quietly shaped a region, a kingdom, and a continent. As you imagine the miners finishing their work for the day, hands dusty, tools worn, faces lined with fatigue, you might wonder what they thought about the faraway places their tin would reach. Did they know their work connected them to distant artisans in Bruges, to merchants in Rouen, to pewter craftsmen in London? Did they care? Or did they think only about the next day's labor, the next batch of ore, the next slow, steady step in the long chain of production? Perhaps the most poignant thing about this story is how ordinary the work seemed. Tin did not inspire poetry. It did not decorate royal crowns. It did not dazzle with beauty. Yet it was indispensable. And sometimes in history, the most important things are the ones people rarely talk about. If you stand today near the ruins of a medieval tin mine in Cornwall, the wind will be the loudest sound you hear. The hammers are gone. The furnaces are cold. But the legacy remains in countless objects preserved in museums, in the economic structures tin helped create, and in the quiet memory of the people who carved out a living from the stubborn Cornish ground. Cornwall's tin trade did not build cathedrals or write chronicles, but it built something more subtle, the foundation of an economy, the connections between nations and the rhythm of ordinary medieval lives. And in that way, a simple gray metal became one of the quiet architects of medieval England. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, and for letting the gentle corners of history keep you company. If you enjoyed drifting through this quiet story, or if it helped you unwind, I'd be grateful if you tap the like button before you head to sleep. And if you'd like more slow, peaceful history whenever you need it, you can subscribe to the channel Quiet Boring Sleep so you never miss the next calm journey into the past. Rest well, and I'll see you in the next story.